Thank you, and welcome to the fourth day of 58 DAC. I have to share a funny story with you. This morning, I was walking out of the hotel room, a hotel entry, and this car pulled up. This guy gets out and hands me his keys. So anyway, if you're looking for a car, I parked it over on 3rd and Folsom. But by the way, you know, if we were a music industry, Joe Costello would be a rock star. You know, we're not a music industry. Joe's still a rock star. But Joe, of course, is an icon in our industry and is considered, from a business perspective anyway, the founder of EDA, the EDA industry, where in the late 1980s, he was president of Cadence Design Systems and drove annual revenue to over $1 billion. By the way, this was the first EDA company to achieve that milestone. In 2004, he was awarded the Phil Kaufman Award by the Electronic Systems Design Alliance in recognition for his business contributions that helped grow the EDA industry. After leaving Cadence, Joe led numerous startups to successful exits, such as Enlightened, Orb Networks, and Think3. He received his BS in physics at Harvard College and a master's degree in physics from Yale and UC Berkeley. Let's welcome Joe.
Gotta give it to me. All right. Let's have a little bit of fun this morning. Before I get going, I want three things I want to mention. First of all, I don't get out very often. Like, I haven't done anything for 2.5 years. It's the first, we were just talking beforehand. This is the first conference, anything I've done since COVID started. So I first want to say to the DAC, I came because I want to support DAC and the industry, and I think you guys have done an awesome job of trying to do an experience like this as safely as you possibly can. I thought the preparation that was done about it was fantastic. So congratulations to you guys. Nice job getting it done. And I also want to thank all of you guys for having the intestinal fortitude and courage to actually show up, not do it virtually with Omicrons and other things going, so we all appreciate the energy and effort you guys put into coming to a live show like this. I know there's, you have to go through a lot of filters to decide if that's the right thing, so we appreciate all of you guys coming. Thanks for showing up. Which is why we should have a little bit of fun here. But before we do that, I have to tell you, the most exciting, I'm so glad I got to do this one with the awards at the beginning of it, because that was fantastic. One of my worries about EDA over the last 15 years or so has been I haven't felt the energy going into it that I thought was needed. And what I mean by that is the intellectual energy. Look, I haven't been a deep technology guy for 30, 40 years, but it is deep technology that drives our industry. And those papers, all of you, the papers, the awards to the outstanding young professors, et cetera, that's what's going to create a great industry. That's it. So I want all of us to give a round of applause. That's the energy. That's what we need. That's just phenomenal that we've got that kind of intense energy going. So thank you all again for everything. That's what's going to make the huge difference for us. Last, before I get going on the actual thing that I'm going to present for today, which again, not technical. So this is actually someone was saying, well, I don't really understand many. It's one of the people helping with the audiovisual that talks at this is pretty deep. Mine's not that deep. Mine's about market and human psychology, things like that. So rest your deep intellectual brain on that one. You'll use a different part of your brain for this talk. But before I actually start, I do want to say I'd like to dedicate this talk to Jim Hogan. So this is the first DAC in, God knows, 30 years without Jim Hogan, who passed away this last year. Many of you do know him here and were touched by him. Certainly I was. I knew him extremely well, and he changed my life in many ways, up until the last day of his life, second to last day of his life we were talking. He has been transformational in this industry. He kept things going when things were grim. He has helped innumerable companies in this space. This industry wouldn't be what it is today if it weren't for Jim. So we miss him. We miss his energy. If you don't know him, I guarantee you, you've been affected by him. Something that you're doing, some company you're involved with, some technology, he had his hand in it. So he's there. He's like our godfather. We appreciate, Jim, everything you've done. I dedicate the talk to him. If everybody thinks for just 1 second, for those who were with him and knew him well, one thing that he did that really changed your life. For me, he made me laugh when I thought there was nothing to laugh about. Okay, my talk, the title of my talk, When the Winds of Change Blow, Some People Build Walls, Other People Build Windmills. So I'm going to talk about change. The talk is about change. But I'm going to talk about all aspects of change. Obviously, we're here at the Design Automation Conference. I'm going to talk about change in our industry and what that means. I'll get to that. But there's a lot of aspects to change. So I'm going to start out and I'm going to talk about change, how people deal with change. Because in fact, how people deal with change is probably as important, often more important than the change itself. And so I'm going to start talking about that, talk about how humans, individuals, groups of people, companies, markets, the world, countries, how they deal with change. And I'm going to talk about what kinds of changes are the most fundamental important, and then we'll bring it down to the EDA space. And we'll talk about EDA and some of those kinds of changes that I'm talking about that make a dramatic difference and what we might expect over the next decade. So that's the outline of my talk. But we'll start with the most important thing from my point of view about the talk, which is how people deal with change. Because if you're going to implement change, you're going to execute change, whether yourself personally, in your family, in a small organization, in your company, in a country, you've got to deal with the human psychology part of it. And so let's talk about how do people deal with change. The bottom line answer to that is not well. Humans don't like change. That's a pretty fundamental thing. Humans just don't like change. Some people will actually say they like change, and the truth is, if you dig into it, they actually don't like change, which is why on the title of the talk, by the way, this is a Chinese proverb. We'll come back to that a little bit later in the talk. But that's why most people, when they're confronted with change, do the first thing. They build walls. Because they don't like change. They don't want to change. They like the way it is. Now, if your life is fantastic and everything is great, say you're the CEO of Cadence Design Systems today and your stock price is at an all-time high, you're feeling great, like you go, I don't want any change. I like it the way it is right now. So, you could say, I get it, why those people don't want to change. But the truth is, people who have a crappy life, where things are utter crap, if you look at them, they don't like to change either, right? So you go and see that. In fact, this is one of the biggest problems with any kind of addiction, maybe the deepest kind of problems people can have. People are addicts. They struggle to change, and why is that? Why don't they want to change, And the answer, maybe you could say the answer is, well, could get worse. Maybe that's why they don't want to change, because it could get worse if they change. But that's fundamental. People don't like it. There's something inside people that keeps them from wanting to change, good or bad. They don't like to see that kind of change. Think about this. I'm sure you've all heard, and it's actually true. I actually did. I always double check things, so I went to check. I've heard this, so I thought, I wonder if it's really true. They talk about stressful events. What are the most stressful events in people's lives? People say stressful events are things like changing your job, moving, change in relationship, death of somebody in the family, all of these things. Every single thing, I went and checked, it turns out it's true, right? They've done all kinds of studies on it. Everything that is the most stressful has to do with change. That's what causes the biggest stress for people is change. People don't deal well with change. Humans are not good at change. And this is a fundamental thing you've got to deal with when you're thinking about big changes happening. It's that individual human psychology that is the most fundamental problem. Now, why is that? So I spent a lot of time thinking about that because if there's one thing I am pretty good at, I am an agent of change. I am a change guy, right? And probably my whole career, I've been known as an agent of change. And so this is something I've had to deal with my entire life. How do you get people to change when they have this fundamental constitution? I don't want to. I like it the way it is. I'm going to build the wall. That's my view about change. I'm going to build a wall, keep it the way it is. So first you have to understand why people don't like to change. What is it about that? And I have my own theory about what that is. And the real fundamental issue why people don't like why they don't like change is we all live our lives having built a model of the world. And we put the model of the world in our head. Some people have a very complex model, some people a little bit simpler, but we all have a model that we built in our head of how the world operates and how everything works and how things are going to be. If I do this, this is going to happen. That's how I'm going to project into the future. I use my model. I simulate, just like I would simulate a model of anything. I simulate what's going to happen next. I have a model for the world. I use that. That's my model. The truth is that model of the world is what actually is called the ego for human beings. Your model of the world, that's pretty much your ego. That's slightly different than that, but pretty close, right? So that's your model of the world. And that's what I've got it. That model works. It's pretty damn good. Nothing wrong with that model. New data comes in, I use that model, boom, it's good. Change, the reason people like change is they have to change their model. And they don't want to do that. Fundamentally, people don't want to change the model that they have in their head about how the world is and how it works. They use it, it works, it simplifies things, it operates well, does them well. They don't want to change that. And that's why people resist change all the time. It's that model in their head. And they will resist it crazily. The world's different. Observe the results out there. Your model is crap. Nope, I like my model. I'm going to stick with that. They'll stick with it through thick and thin over and over and over again. And so the fundamental thing, if you want to execute change, you have got to, whether it's you personally, in your family, in a company, in a market, you have to change people's model. That's the core thing. The model has to change. If it doesn't change, you're not going to change people's behavior. They'll keep working in the same way all the time and get terrible results, and still they'll build a bigger wall. I know the problem, I'll build a bigger wall. That's the fundamental problem. That's the change, the underlying issue in change. I'll make one other comment about it, which is related. One time I thought about this, it kind of mystified me that as people get older, in general, it's not 100% true, but as people get older, in general, they get more conservative. And when I say conservative, I mean partly they resist change. That's part of conservative, right? Is that they don't want to change. They kind of like it the way it is. They're going to keep it the way that it was. They don't want to change that much. And I thought, that's weird, that as you get older, that people get that way. And a lot of people have, reasons for it, why that is, that, hey, they're just, they're set in their ways, is what people say. Well, they are. But that's because they got their model. It fundamentally comes from that model, and they're going to stick with it. And that's the model they're going to use, and they don't want anything to interrupt them. The truth is, actually, the older you get, if you think about it, the less you have to lose is the truth, right? But actually, the reason people get more conservative is they believe they have something to protect. That's why they get more conservative. They think they've got something to protect. Like, okay, I'm going to get conservative because I'm going to protect it. I'm going to build the walls. I'm going to protect that thing that I've got, whatever it is, money, family, reputation, career, something. I'm going to protect it. And they build the walls around that to protect themselves. So that's a mechanism people do. Now, everything that I have said about people, individual people, about not liking change, having these models, having difficulty making any kind of change with that, being conservative as they get older, mature, etc. Everything I said about that is true about companies, groups of people, and it's also true about marketplaces and countries. It's true about all those things. Groups of people are actually worse than individuals. It's easier to change one person. It's much harder if you need to change a larger group of people because you have to deal with every individual in the group psychology. And by the way, groups have their own ego and psychology and model too, which are hard to change. So When you think about change, as we go through this conversation, and sometimes I know people get frustrated, maybe some of the people who've done some of these great papers that we were just giving awards for, you get frustrated. You go, why can't these people see? What's wrong with them? This is the right way to look at the world. And they don't, right? The problem you're dealing with is not the intellectual content of the things you worked on, it's the human psychology. It's the ego and the mental models that you have. And if you want to change the world, you've got to get good at changing people's minds, not just come up with great ideas. You have to figure out how to change people's consciousness and change their mental world model, or you will never change anything. That's just as important as the fundamental intellectual breakthrough that you might have had on things. Okay, that's the backdrop. So we're going to talk about change. Through all of it, keep in mind, you're going to have to figure out how to change people's mental models and consciousness about those to make things happen. Now, what kind of model, what kinds of things am I talking about when I say the winds of change are blowing? Well, there's lots of change. Some is not important, some is important. The ones that are important, the big ones, the big ones, are what I call macro trends. These are the ones that make a huge difference. These macro trends are happening at a large scale. Certainly, it happens industry-wide. Sometimes it's country-wide. Sometimes it's worldwide. It can be market things that have to do with fashion and direction people head. It can be based on technology, some fundamental technology trend. It could be politics that drives it, because that drives it. It could be cultural. There's a lot of these big macro trends. The macro trends are the ones that I will tell you set the biggest direction, the biggest gains that anybody makes in markets, making money, building great companies, and the biggest losses people have all have to do with macro trends. It's all about the macro trends. That's the number one thing. You've heard the expression, a rising tide floats all boats. It's true. By the way, a tide is a physical version of a macro trend, right? The enormous amount of energy in tides, enormous amount of energy. Yes, and they rise all boats. That is true in human organizations and the human society. When these macro trends happen, there's an enormous energy in them, enormous energy. Don't try to fight them. I'm going to go back to this. Building walls doesn't work for that. Just doesn't work. So enormous macro trends. I'm going to give you a quick story about this. When I was a kid, I grew up in the 60s, and life was different in the 60s. Like as a kid then, you could do whatever the hell you wanted as a kid in the 60s. I mean, my friends and I, first thing in the morning, we'd take off. We wouldn't show up until dinner time. No one knew where we were, what we did. I moved 16 times while I was growing up. One of the stops of those 16 times, this is why I'm a good change agent, by the way. My parents trained me on change. I think that was their mission, take that, you'll move 3 times this year, not once. So we lived one time in Santa Barbara, and in the 60s, surfing was it, man. I mean, this is the thing. We are all going to become surfers. So, we tear down to the beach first thing in the morning. And I don't mean a public beach with like lifeguards and shit like that. I mean like a gnarly beach all by ourselves. And we'd go out and we were dying. We were trying to figure out how to buy ourselves a surfboard, learn how to surf. But at the time, we could only body surf because we didn't have a surfboard yet. So one day we're out body surfing, two of us, and this it changed, the ocean changed. These enormous sets of waves come in. And when I say enormous, this is like Santa Barbara. For Santa Barbara, the waves don't get that big. These are like 10, 12-foot waves. And we couldn't go in. We were trapped outside. So finally, they started to kind of die down, and we start like paddling in. And we can't get in. And like, we're getting panicked about this. It's like, what the hell is going on here? Now, there's 2 surfers on boards that are kind of far away. We hear one of them yelling and waving their arms. Like, what? And like, finally we can hear him go, little dudes. They're yelling to us. And they're waving. So we're thinking, oh my God, they're going to like put us on their boards and save us, right? So we swim out to these guys. And we get there and the guys go, nope, they're not going to save it. They said, dudes, don't you know about rip currents, right? So they explained to us, and I won't go through the whole thing about how rip currents work, but the bottom line, after some of these big sets of waves, you get this incredible outrushing of the current, of the tide, and there's no way to swim against it. Many a person, including professional swimmers, have died fighting the rip tide. Said, don't do it, little dudes. We're not going to, we thought we were going to get into the board. No, you're going to get into the board. Just swim over there where there's no rip current, and they'll go in, and it'll be just fine. This riptide thing is exactly what happens with macro trends. Macro trends are like a societal-wide riptide. We're sitting there, we would never have gotten there. Never, unless luckily the rip current had stopped, sometime before we get drowned. We would never have gotten there. So rip currents and macro trends, they're similar. They have the same kind of feel to them. Don't fight them. Building walls is about against wind, trying to swim against the tide and rip current. These things don't work. They aren't going to work. Now let's talk about what some of these macro trends might look like in our space, in our world. So, okay, I already said, I started this talk, I said we're going to talk about change. People don't like change. So giving a talk about change is like one of the worst talks you can give, because everybody's like, I don't want to talk about your shit. Change, I don't want to change, right? So instantly you'll get a negative reaction. So the changes I'll talk about first, I'm going to go historic first. We'll start historically to give some examples of change in our industry, in our space, to kind of set the model. And see, that's already in your model. See, I'm safe. I'm going to be really safe when I start talking about this stuff because you already have the mental model about this. This is history. And so you go, yeah, sure, okay, got that. That's right, I remember that. That's good. It's part of my mental model. I'm all okay. And then we'll turn to the part that's the new stuff where you'll probably get irritated with me, but that's okay. All right, the EDA world, we're going to start way back. EDA world, the 1980s. This is before I even got, like I started in EDA in 1984, something like that, 84, 85. At that time, it was a strange world. Mainframes and mini computers were the platform of choice for hardware. You did batch processing of things. Manual layout was still being done with Calma machines. There was very limited software. There's some DRC software at the time, a little bit of gate-level simulation, not much. Internal CAD teams and big semiconductor companies were the ones developing all the software at the time. Pretty much at that time, only big companies could afford anything that looked like CAD, right? That was the world of EDA in the early 80s when I first got to this business and to this industry. So what broke the market open here? So there were some big things that happened at the time. First, graphical workstations showed up. That was the first, the RISC processors, Sun, Spark was that first RISC processor, Unix, C, these were some of the things that broke things open. Every designer could have a computer on their, right on their desk. Right now, that seems crazy to think back about that right now because we take it for granted that you can have one in your pocket now, but that was the way it was at that time. It was a big breakthrough. ASIC design methodology didn't exist. That just started in the 1980s. That was the first time you got this ASIC design methodology. Boy, all of a sudden, designers could build chips on their own, with an ASIC design methodology. I didn't have to have teams of hundreds of people or tens of scores of people to do it. And software. All of these things kind of combined with that graphics workstation, the ASIC design methodology, it inspired people to build a set of new software that supported both those graphic workstations and that ASIC design methodology. It was truly incredible what happened. This ushered in a golden age of both IC design and EDA. And it was a golden age. It was phenomenal. I will tell you, for me, and it's again why I'm so excited by the energy of those awards to the people winning papers here. It's the energy of the technologists in this space, whether they're an IC designer or they're working on EDA software. It's that energy that drives things. I'm telling you, the energy was palpable. You go to a customer site back in the late 80s and the early 90s, as they're getting their arms around, they got their workstation, they got this software, they can do an ASIC. They're on top of the world. They feel like they can do anything. That energy and that excitement drives things in an incredibly different way. It was so exciting. It's like, man, I've got everything at my fingertips. I can do it myself. I have all the tools to make this thing happen. This meant small companies, system companies, all of a sudden they could afford to do IC design. I didn't need mainframe computers. I didn't need hundreds of CAD people. I didn't have my own team of people to develop tools. I could buy a workstation and the software, and I myself, with these new, very advanced methodologies, could build the chips myself. So there was a proliferation of chip design. Tons of ASIC startups started at that time. System houses were doing ASICs. There was tons, huge growth in the IC business at the time, huge growth in the EDA business too. This is when I became CEO of Cadence and rode that wave, right? So yeah, you know, there's certain things I do well as a CEO, but I'm telling you, the thing I do best is spot a macro trend, a current, and ride it. Because that's how you actually make the huge progress. Spot the trends and ride the trends. I'm not some friggin' genius. You know, I spot the trend and I ride the trend. You guys are geniuses, right? The guys doing all those papers, right? I spot the trends and ride the trends. That's the key. Now, what were those macro trends that drove that first generation? They were macro trends. There was a new hardware platform. That was one of the macro trends. That was a big, big, big change. The workstation was a big change. That macro trend from mainframe minis, shared resources, into something that's sitting there on your desktop. That new business model, software-only business model, that was a huge macro change. I know that sounds really silly today. Really? Software only is a business? Oh, come on, Joe, you're exaggerating. No, I'm not. I will tell you, the worst business, when I say worst, the most difficult, angry, bitter conversation I've ever had in business in my entire life was at Cadence when some of us supported going software only as opposed to what at the time was the turnkey system model, where you ship hardware and software for CAD. That's what everybody did at the time. And man, oh my God, it was bitter, vitriolic, angry. People threatened to quit over it. You know, it seems so obvious right now. Well, it seemed obvious to me too at the time. That's a macro trend. There's no, and by the way, why was it obvious to me at the time? There's no value add to a software company developing hardware. You know, there's two different worlds. You want to develop hardware, develop hardware. You want to develop software, develop software. They're two different things. It was obvious, but people fought over it. Why? Because of ego. Because they had a mental model that, you know, that was what they kept saying. But that's how everybody's always done it. That's how we do it. We ship hardware and software together. There's more revenue. Yeah. But it's not true. That's not the macro trend. The other one was this design wave that was growing at the time, the ASIC trend, huge. That was driving the whole thing. You know, it was driving the whole thing. Again, that was the core, you know, technological innovation, you know, in terms of changing your design methodology. But it was those macro trends that drove it. It's not some great, you know, magic genius moment, you know, of one guy or a handful of people. It was a group of people recognizing these trends and riding those trends. Yes, there's tons of innovation inside of that, but if you weren't inside the umbrella of those trends, if you weren't riding that set of currents, you weren't going to win in that market space. Super critical. All right, then what happened? So I left EDA for a while, you know, 15 years, something like that. And I kept in touch with it, but I call it, you know, they were some dark days there in the 2000s, you know, for both the semiconductor industry and EDA industry. There was tremendous consolidation in the semiconductor industry. By the way, internal CAD came back in a lot of ways. When I say internal CAD came back, what I mean, not the same. They weren't necessarily building all of their own technology and tools, but they were building huge edifices. And they had, you know, purchasing organizations, and there were strict rules about what you could buy, what you wouldn't. They were very complex flows. You had to do the flow just this way. It looked a lot the same as it did 20 years before, except they just weren't building it all themselves. They also had huge data centers, you know. Tens of thousands of machines in even mid-sized companies, hundreds of thousands in large companies, you know, so huge edifice was being created here. That means there's not much room for small companies. So small companies started to peter out. There wasn't as much in the semiconductor world. Same thing happened in EDA, dark ages in EDA too. Wasn't much room for small EDA companies. You know, everything had gotten consolidated, Cadence, Synopsys, Mentor, the big three. You know, they were building full flows. It was really hard to break into those full flows, you know, because it was complicated to get your tool inserted in there. And those companies made it difficult to make that happen, both practically and legally to make that happen. Economics was a bitch, right? Why? Because these guys had all-you-can-eat deals with the big customers. Forget trying to get into a big customer. It wasn't going to happen. You know, they'd look at their prices. You're selling me this cool simulator. You want to sell it for me at the low price of $10,000. Well, geez, I'm paying $750 in my all-you-can-eat deal, so that ain't going to work. So that was really difficult, made it super difficult. And of course, that meant there was little investment for chip companies or small startup chip companies, EDA companies. So there wasn't the thriving innovation, which is, again, why I'm highlighting it's wonderful to see this intellectual energy that you're seeing with these papers and the professors, because that's what you need to drive it. You need a robust industry that's going to draw people in because it's exciting. There's exciting problems. There's things to get done here. There's a great future ahead of us. So here we are in the 2020s. What are the macro trends here? There are macro trends here that are driving things. And these start maybe to get people more uncomfortable, right? Because these are the ones now. They're not in the past. These are the ones today. One of them, there is a new hardware platform today. Now, it is funny because I was out of this business for a while. And so I've been on the board of several companies. I help them out. I've been working on cloud stuff for a long, long time. And when I got back involved in EDA, one of the biggest shocks to me, someone said, well, we don't really do cloud in EDA. And I thought they were teasing me. I said, oh, come on. No, we don't want to really do cloud yet in EDA. I said, are you kidding? It's one of the most advanced technology on planet Earth, and we don't do the cloud? What the hell is that all about? And then I dug in, and it was true. We don't really do the cloud yet in EDA. The rest of the world has moved on. We're still building walls in EDA, right? And we're still ignoring the obvious, and we're going to get to that here. Let's talk about the obvious. Listen, cloud is inevitable. It is inevitable. It's happening. It's not, we're going to be the only industry in the world that doesn't go to cloud full force. That's not going to happen. And it's economics. Remember this, Bill Clinton, that was his big line when he won the election. It's the economy, stupid. He had a little sheet of paper he would read. It's the economy, stupid. Just remember that. Hey, here, it's the economics of scale, stupid, in this industry. That's what's going to drive us to the cloud. It's 100% true. Look, the other thing that's going to drive you there, data centers are not the business of semiconductor companies. It's not. It's hardly the business. Look, a lot of companies struggle with, a lot of companies who said they wanted to get into the data center business haven't succeeded. It's a tough business, and you got to be focused on it. It's not their business. Hey, remember this in the semiconductor industry? Jerry Sanders, AMD, real men have fabs. That was one of his great lines, real men have fabs. Well, that didn't work out so well for Jerry, right? And look now, okay? The real men at AMD dumped their fab, and they're whipping Intel right now. Why? Because they're using a fab that actually can produce state-of-the-art chips, not building their own, like Intel is struggling with, right? Hey, look, if you don't build your own fab in semiconductor, why would you build your own data center? It makes 0 sense, 0 cents. That macro trend is going to happen, 100%. There's a second one in this space, business model. And this one's just as obvious to me, and it's just as vitriolic in this space as that original conversation I told you back when I was at Cadence in the early days about software versus software and hardware, turnkey systems. The new business model is the SaaS business model, and let's not bullshit around about it. When I say SaaS business model, I mean pay by the minute, right? That's how it works, right? Licenses made a lot of sense in the era of workstations. It does. You buy a workstation, you buy software for that workstation. It's an individual thing. They make 0 sense in the cloud. A license model makes no sense in the cloud. 0 cents. It doesn't make any sense at all. I buy my compute by the minute. Why would I buy my software by the license? That's ridiculous. It makes 0 sense. Not going to happen. This is all done. It's over with. Don't even think about it. Everybody can yell and scream and build their walls. It's not going to end up that way. And the economics on the software side are super compelling. So way more compelling than the software business model was in the turnkey age of the old days. By the way, it's really simple. I do call it I do love this. It's the stopwatch business model is the whole thing. This is the essence of why it makes sense. In any design cycle, this one I'm using simulation as the example. In any design cycle, you're fooling around, you don't use that many compute cycles, you're getting there. Finally, you get to tape out, and you need a ton of compute cycles. And then when you're done, you don't need so many, right? The model of a certain number of computers and a certain number of software licenses is ridiculous. It's not going to work in this. It doesn't work at all for this. Because most of the time, I have too many licenses, and when I need them, I don't have enough. I have the right number of licenses 2 times. That's why the stopwatch. The stopwatch is correct 2 times a day, right? So same thing here. I got the right number of computers and licenses twice a day. It makes 0 sense. Other trends here. There is a new design wave. Just like that ASIC design wave, there's a new design wave growing here that's super important. There's many talks going on here about this, but I can't emphasize it enough. It's not just a great marketing idea. There are this is based on real fundamental trends. I don't need to tell you. Most of you guys know this, all yourself. I do think that the Turing lecture that Hennessy and Patterson did, that paper was a phenomenal top-level view of this whole thing. But the bottom line, guys, general-purpose architectures aren't going to work anymore. We got away with 20, 30 years of Intel, Moore's Law. Every single generation, you got more transistors, more speed, everything worked out just fine. But it's dead. That's not happening anymore. The future of high-speed, high-performance computing and capability is going to be specialized processors. The domain-specific architectures are the critical thing. And I won't go into the details on it. You guys know this yourself, but this is a huge shift. Everybody was pouring everything behind these gigantic architectures, whether it was an Intel architecture, the Snapdragon, or the, pick your large architecture, the GPU at NVIDIA. That was where all the energy was going because you keep seeing that performance improvement. That's not the future. The future is going to be these domain-specific architectures. They are what are going to give us high-speed performance. And then the last one I'll hit is a new ecosystem. There's a new ecosystem, and again, this is something that's true everywhere else, in almost every other business segment. People are going to an open approach to doing things. And we have to look at that, look at what others have done. When I say open approach, we have a walled garden approach in EDA. It's very much a walled garden. And I know people have their partner programs, special gate, give me the secret code and handshake and come into my garden, right? We got that stuff in EDA, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an open approach. Open systems, open software programs are happening everywhere around us, even in hardware. We'll come to that in a second. But these are two examples. Linux Foundation. Look at Kubernetes. Kubernetes is the fastest growing phenomenon in the history of IT and of the history of man, how fast it's being adopted. It's an open source platform. And all the competition is working to build that platform together to give us a much better cloud native compute experience for people. In our space, if you go to IC's EDA, look, semiconductor guys are doing it. The RISC-V is a beginning. There's an open source platform in the hardware side of things. I don't know how many of you know Open Compute Platform. They're doing it at a different level. Open Compute Platform is trying to solve that problem at the data center level and thinking it through that way. So people in the hardware world are starting to think about it. We've got to do it in EDA too. We have to think about that. And by the way, I am not saying, I know they're grumpy people, sure, that's fine for you. You don't run one of these big EDA companies. We can't give away our software. I'm not talking about giving away software. I'm a business guy. You don't have to give it away. There's all kinds of open source models. Here, the real thing that you need is the platforms. You need to make it simple and easy to put together full flows of things. Don't put artificial barriers between tools, whether it's formats for data being transferred or the way things connect. Make it simple to build these things. In the cloud, by the way. We need a cloud platform that is open and simple and without barriers between it. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about that could unleash things in this industry. So look, you put these things together, guys. I really believe there's going to be a renaissance in EDA. There's already been a renaissance in the stock prices, so that's been going really well. People are doing well. We'll come back and talk about that if I have time in a few minutes. But no, I'm talking about a renaissance in EDA. I'm talking about a place where everybody's going to want to come. All of you guys who wrote the paper, all your friends are going to be jealous of you in 5 years. Man, that's the place to be. EDA, the problems that we're trying to solve are cool, they're interesting, they're growing, there's a lot of excitement in that space. That's what I'm talking about, renaissance of EDA. More innovation, more young companies, more things happening, more designers able to actually go and do with their own tools what's going on. Now, I'll tell you an example of this, and it's true. This is the analogy to what happened back in the old days with the ASIC design. The engineer got his graphics workstation, and he got his software tools, and I can do ASIC design myself. Think about this for a second. One engineer sitting in his living room in Mumbai with a cloud platform has more compute and software capability than the best engineer at Intel or NVIDIA. That's no shit. It's no shit. If you have access to the cloud, one guy sitting in his living room can have access to more than any engineer at any of the biggest companies in the world. That's the difference. That's revolutionary. That changes the world. That gives the power back to the designer. It's inspirational. That's what led the first inspiration with ASIC design. That's what can lead the inspiration here. And those guys are going to be ripping. They're going to be building a ton of new kinds of design-specific architectures that are going to change our world. That's what's going to happen. Now, one last thing. There is a dark cloud, something hovering out here. It's a little bit problematic, quite problematic, actually. And what is that dark cloud? It's the new geopolitics. That's another trend. Remember I told you there's lots of macro trends. Some are political. So I'm going to talk politics. Now, before you all go get crazy on me, I don't like any politician. So I can get really negative on Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Name me your politician. I can go and dissect them. I wouldn't have any of these idiots run any of my companies. Not one, right? They're not the right people. They wouldn't have a clue how to run any of the companies I'm involved with. They wouldn't have them, right? So don't get me wrong. When I'm criticizing this, not political from that point of view. I'm just trying to state the facts about how messed up things are and how we got to do something about it. So first of all, this geopolitics that I was talking about. I'll go back. What I said, it's us against the world. Now, you could have said that was US against the world, but it's not just the US. There's a lot of people, a lot of countries, a lot of leaders around the world. It's not that disease, that virus. We have COVID. We also have this virus. We have this geopolitical isolationism that's happening. And how did we get here? It's surprising to me because I remember in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I was super excited. I have 2 daughters. I was so excited about it. I thought, the world has changed fundamentally. My kids are going to be safe. Why did I believe that? Because the world was becoming so interconnected and interdependent that it was going to be tough to have wars. It was going to be really tough to fight. When people get completely intertwined, it's really hard to fight with the other guy, right? So I thought, this is beautiful. And then George Bush II got elected. And he had the idiots Cheney and Rumsfeld, right, who were trying to manipulate and start wars. They eventually did, all right? And so but one was with China. There was like this weird interaction it had with China. I was like, uh-oh, let's see. And guess what? It didn't work. They weren't able to start anything. Why? There was too much interdependency. We had both too much to risk on both sides. I said, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. My kids are going to be safe. I can rest assured my kids are going to have a great life. I never would have predicted what's happened that I could believe over a period of time you could screw all that up. I just never would have predicted you could do it in a few years, that you would get enough idiots running enough countries that had this same crazy isolationist that we don't need anybody else point of view, that they could screw things up as fast as they did. Look, this is the famous statement, Donald Trump. Trade wars are good and easy to win. How'd that work out for you, Donald, right? It was ridiculous. It was not a well-thought-through strategy in any way, shape, or form. And it was a complete mess. And when he said this, trade wars, he was mostly talking about China. So China is an issue for us, and I want to talk about that. We do have a China problem, right? We pushed China into a corner. As I said, we pushed the dragon into the corner, big time. And they reacted. They have the resources to react. They have the brain power to react, and they reacted. And by the way, I would too if I was running China, right? It's like, I don't know what people think about. If you were running China, you'd do the same damn thing. Look, I have talked to scores of people in China. Here's what they say. Donald Trump did what none of our greatest minds or our greatest leaders in China could do. For years, for decades, they've tried to unify people in the technology industry, in semiconductors, EDA. They've tried to get them to do things cohesively together. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Everybody was opportunistic. They just bought the best technology around the world. They didn't pay any attention to the Chinese leaders or the great minds in China until Donald Trump did this. Now they are incredibly unified in China right now. They're investing more in semiconductor-related technology than the rest of the world by 5, at least by 5. Huge money is pouring in. This is no shit. There's 5, it depends who you ask. There's 5 to 10,000 ASIC startups in China right now. 5 to 10,000, right? Huge proliferation. Reminds me of what? Oh gosh, that reminds me of the golden age here in North America and Europe back in the 90s, right? Very similar. I will tell you, China is going to become the largest market for EDA over the next 5 to 10 years. I believe 5. I think it's going to happen fast. Why? Because they've got tons of energy here. They have tons of energy going into semiconductor, these startups, et cetera. It's going to be a huge market. And if we're not going to be, and by the way, the valuations of EDA companies, just to give you a flavor for this, blows my mind. There are two EDA startups in China who have less than 2 years, one's 1 year, one's 1.5 years. They both have valuations over $1 billion, startup companies. That's never happened in the Western world, never happened. They've gotten over $300 million of investment, these two companies. There are 3 companies going public in China. One, $20 million in revenue. You know what its market cap is? $2 billion, $1.8 billion, right? Never happened in the United States. Nothing like this has ever happened. I'm just telling you, the energy poured into this, and it's all because of the Donald Trump effect. That's what made this thing happen. They felt they had to defend themselves and build their own industry. Bad strategy. Plus, here in the United States, we have politicians saying, do more, cut them off more, let's get more violent and vicious about it. Look, I'm a big believer. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, right? The interconnectedness was a much better strategy for us. What do we do? Well, here's my view. This is my version of it. Trade wars are hard to win and impossible if you don't have a strategy. We didn't have a strategy. If you really were thinking strategically, you would have been pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into semiconductor and semiconductor-related technologies all through the United States, and you would have partnered with Europe and India, et cetera, and said, okay, let's go for it. Let's have a war. You don't start a war and then just go away and do something else. That's ridiculous. It doesn't work that way. So what do we do now? Guys, you can't give up on the fastest growing marketplace. That's my view. You can't give up. But it's not going to change quickly. Once the genie's out of the bottle, once they realize Donald Trump kinds of people can be elected and screw things up in 4 years, there's going to be a problem with trust for some period of time. One thing it says is we've got to be involved in this industry in politics. And we've got to say this is stupid. This is not the right strategy for the world and for our industry and for technology. And they're involved in us. You can't just say, well, you know, it's not our thing. We're not politicians. Well, you know, guess what? These macro trends, they hit you. They don't ask permission. And we have to play the long game here. We have to think really long and hard and carefully about how we're going to play the long game and make sure that we're a participant in the largest market for EDA in the world come 5 years from now. So we've got to find a way to do that. You don't want to be excluded from that. I'll tell you one other shocking and scary thing about this. I was talking with arguably the best export lawyer in the United States of America. And she's brilliant. You know, I won't give through her resume because then you'll know who she is. She's brilliant. She said, if she were building a technology company today, not just EDA, any technology company today, she goes, I would be loath to have a single employee in the United States of America, right? From a legal point of view, right? That's a sad, sad commentary. That's exactly the wrong thing. That's not why we're giving people papers and awards here. You know, we want to have worldwide innovation and share ideas and technology and thought processes. That, you know, the terrible commentary on things. If you want to read the book that, in my opinion, is the best book on strategies on how to deal with the winds of change, read Innovator's Dilemma by Clay Christensen. It's an old book, 25 years. He updated it like 3 or 4 years ago. Phenomenal book. I read it every couple of years. You know, and it is the essence of what you do and how you deal with the winds of change. And it's not just a book about startup companies. It's a book for Cadence, Synopsys, Mentor, all the guys that are the winners today, too. It's strategies for how anybody deals with the winds of change. Great book. You should take a read. I had a lot of things to say about it, but I'll skip that for right now and right to the end. Look, guys, it is true. The winds of change are blowing. I pointed out several of these big macro trends and winds. They are real, and they're happening for sure today. The biggest thing you can do is look inside yourself. Just look inside yourself and look at how you're dealing with and reacting to the change, because it starts right there. You know, the collective problem you get inside companies or countries or marketplaces starts individually. It does start individually. Look inside. Don't resist. Don't resist. Reality is reality. Resistance is all in your friggin' head. It's not real. It's in your mind. It's in your mental model. Deal with it yourself. It's not out there. It's in here. You can deal with it. Don't resist. Don't swim against the riptide. You're never going to win the game that way. On the flip side, I am telling you, it's like, people will say a lot of really nice things sometimes about what I did in EDA and things like that. I didn't do that much. I spotted the trends and I wrote them. I spotted the macro trends. I realized the infinite power, way bigger than me, way bigger than Cadence. The infinite power of these things. Tides, riptides, huge winds, hurricanes. These are incredible, powerful forces. Harness that. Harness that. If you get in line with it, if you recognize it, you don't resist, you harness that, it will rise you to incredible success. And listen, if you do that, I guarantee you, you will find yourself in the middle of this renaissance of EDA and chip design. I guarantee it. Thank you very much.